I'm very delighted to have Eugenia Bone here to give us a rundown of Have a Good Trip, exploring the magic mushroom experience. And with that, Gina, why don't you give us the kind of 101 of the book. Not everybody has read it, and so maybe fill people in about what it is, but also yeah, give us your rundown of it.
I will. I'm looking at this incredible chat and people from all over. It's so great. I love how big our tribe is.
Yeah.
Makes me very happy to see everyone. Thanks for showing up today. I hope we have a lively discussion. So this book kind of came about in a little bit of a weird way. After I wrote Mycophilia, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about that was advocating for rescheduling psilocybin, because of the sort of academic research that was coming out and how promising it was. And I wrote about my own experiences. And the response to that op-ed was like, it really knocked me off my socks. I was unprepared to get, hundreds of emails and stuff from people asking like where they could get mushrooms. It was just overwhelming for me. And there was this one gal, for example, who just begged me to meet with her husband. And I was like, I'm not a doctor or any, I don't have anything to offer this person. She said, please just meet him. And so I did. I met him in a cafe and he cried the whole time. So I was super sensitive to the curiosity and that the general public had about these mushrooms. We as amateur mycologists have long known about them and been curious about them and experimented with them. But the greater public hadn't. So I thought, okay, maybe there's a book here and I should write about this stuff and in more depth. And my, agent was like, "Ooh, it's kind of scary." I didn't care. I was going to go for it. And then I was working on my proposal and I got wind through the literary grapevine that Michael Pollan was going to do a book. And I thought, he's going to crush me like a bug. So I decided, I'm not going to go for it. I'm going to write a book about bacteria instead, which I loved. And I'm so interested and still stay interested. But then I guess it was at the end of the pandemic, and my editor, the person who edited Mycophilia, was buying books for Flatiron Press, which is a subsidiary of Macmillan. And she called me up and she said, Flatiron wants a mushroom book. Do you think you have one in you? And I thought, well, actually, I think I do. I had been teaching a psychedelic mushroom class at the New York Botanical Garden for the past few years. And I was feeling like the hype, the media hype that was unleashed by Michael's book and by the new science that was coming out, mainly academic science, but also in the business press, because companies were beginning to be formed to test psilocybin as a medical drug, and then Louis' film Fantastic Fungi came out. Everybody was into foraging at that time with their families and stuff, and I just felt like there was a lot of positive energy out there, a lot of positive hype, and I had been kind of a part of that, but I also felt like it was kind of underrepresented, like it was like misrepresented, the harms, the downsides, the sort of anything grody about the mushrooms wasn't really coming out. And that seemed like a problem to me. And so I was really inspired to write this kind of book because of the hype in the media. I wanted to do something that was more, that gave a bigger picture of the psychedelic experience, the goods and the bads, the knowns, the unknowns, and the unknowables, if you will. And then there was a lot more to write about because there was so much increased research going on. I mean, since I wrote Mycophilia, something like 300 universities or colleges have opened psychedelic research centers. Or maybe the number is 600. I should double check.
Yeah.
But like a lot. No, 300 universities worldwide. Um, but now you can get a PhD in psychedelic something. So it's really there's a lot of information out there, and I'm basically a journalist. I mean, I write a lot of personal memoir style stuff, but I'm basically a nonfiction journalist. And so when there's that much research going on, there's stuff to write about. And and the final reason that I thought I had a book to share was because of the increased public curiosity. Um, it was like just the fact that I had written, well, here it's like this. I used to go to dinner parties here in New York, and I'd sit next to someone, and as is typical with New Yorkers, they'd say, what do you do? And I would say, well, I might write about mushrooms and molds, and they'd be like, I'd like to sit somewhere else. But but now, when I say, oh, I just wrote a book about psychedelic mushrooms, forget about it. I am trapped for the rest of the meal, answering
Mhm.
questions or like, how do you, how do you take microdoses? Can you buy mushrooms on the internet? What about growing mushrooms? Where is it legal? Where is it not? What about a retreat? Can you microdose at a retreat? All kinds of like mixed information, skewed
Yeah.
all over the place. And so I thought, well, there's a general public curiosity about these of among folks that don't really know anything about mycology or psilocybe mushrooms or anything like that. So I wrote the book for them. I wrote it for, it for your auntie who's saying, I want to buy microdoses I bought these microdoses on the internet. What's that? Or your cousin who has maybe was a vet and has PTSD and wants to go on retreat, but it's $1,000 a day and he's not sure how to evaluate what he's getting himself into. I kind of took this posture of a sort of Ralph Nader of psychedelics,
Mhm.
kind of consumer oriented, because I felt like the psychedelic scene was kind of an echo chamber. Everybody already knew a certain amount, um, and that and the and I felt like if the information wasn't available, some people could get hurt, and so.
Mhm.
So I just thought I'd write a kind of everything you ever wanted to know about magic mushrooms, but
Yeah.
maybe appropriate to ask.
I think it was so timely and really appropriate because, yeah, as somebody in the mushroom sphere, we were all kind of looking at each other like people are pretty excited about this, and we're only hearing the good news, but nobody's talking about the dangers that could potentially be happening, or ill effects from it, or potential, um, yeah, traumas that can be caused from these things, especially with people that have previous psychological um, yeah, imbalances and things like that. So it's really one of these things that is really important. Plus, without regulation, without understanding the amount of dose, and dose, of one thing is going to have a completely amount of a dose of the same species with a different variant or of a different species. And this is where people can really get into trouble if they're
Oh
kind of
yeah,
flippantly using these things. So
totally. This one gal told me a story about she was getting married, and she and her husband had used magic mushrooms a few times, in small doses and stuff. So after the wedding, they were heading to the reception, and they each took like a friend offered them a mushroom. They each took a little nibble, less than, they thought they knew their tolerance, but it turned out this cultivar was extremely strong because this gal told me that she entered her reception party and realized that she was like, as they say, tripping balls. And it was really
yeah.
uncomfortable for her. And in fact, she said it was made even worse by the fact that it was outdoors and they had these little tables with like dried leaves and sticks kind of decor and candles. And this wind came up and started knocking the candles down and setting everybody, all the table decorations on fire. And she's so this is like a, the perfect example of, um, of the right dose for a particular setting. I mean, the
Yeah.
dose plus the setting creates the experience you have, but
Yeah.
dosing is very difficult because just like cannabis, cultivated psilocybe cubensis are getting strong, or they can be very strong. One can be 3 times stronger than the other.
Right. And yeah, and people who've never tripped on mushrooms or even eaten edibles, if you eat too much, it goes downhill fast. Um, Also, speaking of weddings, I do have to. I noticed that you wrote something in the epilogue about a wedding that Art Goodtimes officiated in the fall of 2023, where the
Yeah,
bride carried fungi.
I want to
yeah,
go through whose wedding
Yeah,
you
whose
were
wedding
talking
was
about.
that?
yeah, yeah. That was really a nice wedding.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. Well, I love that it's immortalized in this book. I
yeah.
appreciate it. Um,
I think I should tell people, folks that like mycophilia, that was a really kind of personal journey that drops into
yeah.
the science. And that's the kind of book I would have done with this one. But it was a combination of me feeling like, the need to put some information out there that was really useful.
Hmm.
Um, and also the fact that my publishers were like, we don't want you to do a memoir like Eugenia's journey. So that
Hmm.
was a little bit, inhibiting for me because of the kind of writer I am. So I kind of put in stuff wherever it seemed to illuminate the narrative. So for those of you who've liked my writing in the past, it's in there. It's just not the
Yeah.
dominant arc in any given chapter. So, but except in the epilogue where I just say, okay, here's how tripping for, 18 months changed my life.
Yeah, which I really appreciated as well. But I,
And that's
I
where
I
you're,
noticed that.
yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that about your writing style this time was that, yeah, it was very much factual. I can understand that. I can understand where that came from, but it was still filled with stories. It was still filled with, your personal life experience, which I really liked a lot. Um, and I appreciated how you kind of your voice in how you talked about psilocybin, especially with yourself, where you were like, it was intentional and playful and serious, and it had all the elements to it that a responsible person that knows what they're doing would approach it by. And I really appreciated that about it too. Is
Thanks,
that,
John.
yeah, the way you spoke about was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
I'm parachuting into this subject.
Right.
I have a
Right.
long, like so many of you, I have a long history, of being curious about it and writing about it one way or the other. So,
Hmm. So, that being said, like, how was the writing process of this book kind of similar, different than Mycophilia or Microbia and your other books and your cookbooks and things like that?
yeah, well, I mean, each book has its own kind of, characteristic, has a lot to do with what's going on, personally and what kind of things are happening in my household. But in
Hmm.
general, this book, because I had so much knowledge to start with, I mean, I wasn't starting from scratch. So it was the real challenge here was deciding what not to include. Um,
Yeah.
so originally, I mean, I was like, okay, I'm writing about psychedelic mushrooms. I'm going to write about all the psychedelic mushrooms and like psilocybin on the butt of certain grasshoppers too. I was
Nice.
interested in the whole
Yeah.
thing. And my editors were like, are you freaking crazy? This is going to be a 500-page book. So even though I did a lot of uh, research, as you know, John, because I also interviewed you on this subject, I didn't include any of the other psychedelics like Amanita muscaria, even though I really wanted to. And nor did I get into psilocybe taxonomy, mainly because I think that kind of work, characteristics of mushrooms and stuff, and keys and all that are really done well elsewhere. Plus, Paul Stamets has a book coming out in May, and
Yes.
that's his territory. So I'm just was happy not to get into all that. I really just talk about psilocybe. I talk about wood lovers and stuff because of some of the strange effects that they can cause in a trip, but the like cyanescence and azarescens, but primarily I talk about psilocybe cubensis because that's the mushroom most people are most likely to consume, to
Hmm.
buy. It's the mushroom of commerce, you know.
Hmm.
And the others, like Gymnopolis, I was thinking, oh, I'll do some
Yeah.
laughing Jim stuff. I've got some laughing
Hmm.
Jims dried in the cabinet,
Yeah.
very bitter. But
Hmm.
you giggle for a while. But the thing is the only people that consume those mushrooms, in my experience, from what I can tell, they're primarily hunters. Like the people that find them are the ones that consume them,
Hmm.
except for Amanita muscaria, which is moving into a commercial realm now. But for a long time, it was really just like people like Larry Evans was
Yeah.
eating mushrooms, so
Yeah.
um, so okay, so it didn't make that much of a sense to include them all. So I was like, there was other things I wanted to write about too, like the psychedelic pharmaceutical industry, which is very
Hmm.
interesting. But once you fall down that wormhole, oh my God, there's like merging and acquisitions, and then departments being dissolved and other departments being coming up, and that I came to realize that that was not a book story, it was a newspaper story, because newspapers can track that stuff on a daily basis, and
Hmm.
it you don't need to write forever about it. So I didn't cover that. I didn't cover the pharmaceutical industry. But what happened is that I was like, had done a lot of research and I was curious about it, so I started a Substack last summer. And I'm actually haven't put anything in that for a while because I've been on book tour and writing talks and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But I'm almost done with a new essay where I can explore some of these ideas. Like I didn't get to write at length about seniors and psychedelics, but I did a Substack. And my Substack is free, by the way. I don't charge for it. Um,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah,
I want
yeah.
to know where it is. Can you type it in the chat box? I think
Yeah, it's
we're
just
gonna have more
Eugenia
fun.
Bone. You just go to
Yeah.
Substack and type in my name, Eugenia Bone, and you sign up. And when I have a new essay, you'll have the option to read it. You'll come into your email. You don't pay, I don't pay. It's just where I get to explore ideas, and I think I'm going to use it to develop ideas for my next book. But currently, I'm working on dosing Amanita muscaria, which is the most
Yeah.
messed up thing ever. It's impossible. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to like sort out what is involved so that people, because it's interesting and the characters are interesting, and I'm hoping people will get something out of it. And then my next Substack, I've started research on it, kind of addresses the psychopharmaceutical company. So couldn't write about it in the book, but I am developing it in the Substack. And here's what happened. I went to the opera. A friend of mine is getting older. He bought 4 tickets to the opera and then realized he wasn't going to be in New York at the time. So he had to unload them. And he gave me and my husband Kevin two, and then he gave two away to some other people he knows. And one of them I was sitting next to, her name was Joyce, and during the opera you can't say a word. Like if you
Mm.
cough, a cough drops comes down the aisle for you. They're very like, don't even think about talking. But then during intermission, everybody is very chatty. And so we're New Yorkers. We turn to each other. What do you do? Turns out this woman, Joyce, was the clinical trials designer or director for Compass Pathways, one of the
Wow.
biggest, psilocybin, pharmaceutical companies in the world. And I was like, forget Figaro. I was totally
Yeah.
focused on Joyce. And so we were talking, and I was like, so many people in the psychedelic world that I encounter think that the FDA is intentionally suppressing psychedelics for various reasons.
Hmm.
And I said, what's your experience? Because she works as a clinical design developer, a clinical trial developer. That's what she does, is develop clinical trials that they can push through the system.
Mhm.
And she said, oh no, it's like, it's not about that. It is like really complicated. It's like putting a round peg in a square hole to put psychedelics into our FDA regulatory system.
Mm.
So I said, can we do an essay or a paper together where we go through all the FDA steps and you show me where psychedelics hit a roadblock and how, what are the different ways they'd have to get around it or
Yeah.
find a way through in order to be regulated, to have their petition approved by the FDA. So we're doing that. We're researching that now.
Ooh,
So it's an
that's
ongoing
interesting.
thing on Substack. It's like so the book is the book, but then there's other things, you know, that it's generating for me, for my curiosity and joy.
That's really interesting. And I know that like just from being at farmers markets and talking to people, being somebody in the mushroom sphere, I get that a lot too, where you have people that come up and they want to join a study. They think that's the way to go. They want to know, how do I get into a study? What can I
Yeah,
do there?
I tell them in my book.
I
I'm like,
know, yeah, you kind
go
of
to
talk about,
clinicaltrials.gov. I mean, there's a lot of that
right.
in
I
the book.
love that you
Do
map
this,
that
do
out.
this. Yeah.
I love that you talk about the communities there, but you also talk about how to find them. You talk
Hmm.
about the groups that exist and what's there. I mean, that's what I appreciate so much about it, is that it's really opens up the sphere, similar to how the mycophile did that, where you're saying, look, these groups exist, these people are out there, and here's where to find them. And
Yeah.
that's a common thread that I certainly appreciated with this, especially at a time where people need the right information,
Yeah.
with the amount of misinformation that's out there.
I did have this section in there on how to navigate the dark web.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, is right. So I had I had the lawyers from Macmillan vetting this book. It took 12 hours to vet this book. It was grueling. I asked the lawyer afterwards, I said, have you ever had to spend this much time on a book? And she's thought about it. And then she goes, yeah, the Horace Mann book. Do you guys remember that book?
Of
The
course.
Horace Mann book was about
Yeah.
many years later, a bunch of students from Horace Mann, which is a private high school in New York, um, they accused a bunch of professors of like sexual predation.
Mm,
It was just like
mm.
lawsuits waiting to happen.
Oh
Anyway,
yeah.
I come in second. It was really, really trying to vet anything, to vet the book for liability and all that purposes. And so as a result, all of my good info about navigating the dark web is kaput. It
Yeah.
didn't make, they were like, no friggin' way.
Yeah.
So it didn't happen. Uh,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, but
Well, fortunately,
that,
Substack doesn't have copy editors.
right?
So,
No.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know if I'll do that. I kind of don't, I had to buy media
Right.
liability insurance. Can you imagine?
Right.
But I did.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
kind of a weird thing to even purchase. I never had done it before. I mean, people who write unauthorized biographies, they're used to it, because like whatever Eastwood gets slaps a lawsuit on you if you quote his wife saying he slapped her around or whatever.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
sometimes you need it. And it's why this book is really kind of characterized not as a guide, but a resource. Guide is a
Mm.
dangerous territory for a writer in this field.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. You're really skirting a fine line there where you want to provide
Yeah.
information, but you don't want to advocate to the point where people should do this. But I think, yeah, you did a really good job of that,
Well, thanks.
putting it out.
Advocacy is a real problem in the psychedelic field. I have to say, I mean, there's all
Yeah.
kinds of like tells for advocacies, but it's sneaky the way it can come up and sound good, but I don't know. I certainly can't do it as a writer. Like I could never, in my view, I could never say, and you all might have noticed who read the book that I never call psilocybin or magic mushrooms a medicine. I quote people who do,
Mhm.
But I don't do that because for me to call psilocybin a medicine is a type of advocacy saying, I think this is how it should be used or could, or, this is how I think it is used, or
Yeah.
that's defining use. When, I can't advocate, otherwise you can't trust me. So
Yeah.
I take all of that out and I call it a drug because no matter how you use it, whether it's as an entheogen, whether it's for spiritual purposes or whether it's to go to the club or, whatever you use it
Yeah.
for, it's still a drug, you know?
Hmm.
And so that's why I call it a drug. I know it pisses off a lot of people in the psychedelic space, though.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really important thing, and I think you talked about that at the beginning, in like either the author's note or maybe it was
Mhm.
right off the bat, where you were saying, "Look, we have to straighten out some definitions before we go into this because it is it, you're it's it showed how much you really kind of had to confront these things and kind of tread these waters and yeah, how I think that's really thoughtful on how you kind of went through in that. I
It's like hyper fine tuned, it's hyper tuned.
Yeah,
um it's hypersensitive, but we're talking about an illegal substance, we're talking about a potentially dangerous substance, we're talking about a
mhm,
wonderfully interesting substance, but still,
mhm,
can we answer some of the
yeah.
questions, Phil?
Yeah, so as other ones come in, yeah, feel free to type them in. But I think this question is one that is really on a lot of people's minds. I think I hear this a lot too. So this is from Fletcher that says, I have many trips under my belt, but haven't done so in 30 years. At 62, I'm ready to do it again and wondering what your advice would be for an old tripper ready to hit it again. Any insights?
Well, so take a look in my Substack, Seniors and Psychedelics, because there's a few things that are different for older people. I became a senior citizen during just like a month or 2 months ago, so I feel like this book, I mean, throughout the book, I was thinking a lot about aging and how to do it gracefully or whatever. So, some of the things that go on for older people that are interested in tripping is that it's common to have a decline in serotonin receptors. That's what once you consume the psilocybin, you metabolize it, and the acids in your gut shear off part of the psilocybin molecule, and the remaining bit of molecule is another. It's called psilocin, and it can travel across the blood-brain barrier, and it docks into serotonin receptors. But we
Mm,
have less as we get older. They
mm,
decrease in number, and so it may be that someone who is it may be that if you trip, who was it? What was his name again?
that was Fletcher.
Fletcher. It
Yeah.
may be, Fletcher, that you will not get as high, you won't trip as hard as you did in the past. That does not mean that you should just go for big, gigantic, heroic trip. It's really important, I think, to be conscious of the relationship between dose and and intention, like what you want to happen, and your setting. Are you in a setting that's safe for the amount of mushrooms that you're eating? Then the other thing is, I think if you it's wonderful for people who, if you don't find like a tripping group, which is not the easiest thing to find, it's not like they advertise on the internet, but if you do have realizations, epiphanies, tough times, or whatever, you can always join an integration group, and they're all over the country. I write there, you can find them based on geography, you can find them based on diagnosis, like people with cancer or autism. You can find them based on identity, like LGBTQ. um, I think that it would be great if there was like a senior tripping Zoom kind of that
Mhm.
you could jump onto every Friday night and
Mhm.
to talk about your experiences and stuff. I haven't encountered that yet, but it seems to me like it would be a good thing for those of us whose experiences, or we have a lifetime of experiences, and so what may go down in the tripping room as a whole, is full of mystery.
Yeah. And I love how you wrote about that in the communities chapter as well. Really bringing together the fact that, like, it really, that's a big reason why people come together to trip. And that fact that when people have tripped together, they generally feel more bonded to each other. Like the people that, if in different experiments or at Burning Man and things like that,
Yeah,
it's kind of one of these things that, you were all there. You were all, even if you're having a different trip, you all had a meaningful experience at the same place at the same time. And, even if it's not at the same place at the same time, there's still a lot to share in those
right.
groups. So,
And those integration groups can be very helpful if something was scary, if something scary happened or whatever.
mhm,
Um, like I just was in Los Angeles speaking to the Los Angeles Club, and it was fantastic because the kind of lead therapist involved in the LA integration group, Psychedelia,
mhm,
she showed up to explain to everybody what she was doing, which I thought was really kind of great because, that city is getting some serious body blows. And I'm empathetic since I live really close to the World Trade Center. I know what it's like to see your city full of, with holes in it. So that integration group she says people aren't talking about the fires yet, but they now all these folks, from the Los Angeles Club know about it, and I think that's worth something.
yeah, it really is. Um, and yeah, thanks for getting the word out there about these things. I'm sure we're going to see a rise in these groups, and hopefully, honestly, in human connection. I mean, that's really an important part of it. We're having a few questions about Amanita muscaria come in through the chat.
Of course.
Um, and if people want to ask their questions in the chat, then we're happy to do that. So somebody is talking about in the Amanita muscaria and the Santa Claus myth,
Yeah.
and that the fact that they can't get past the urine aspect of it. Other people are asking, is it going to be in the Substack article, or is it going to be a full book with Amanita
No, no.
muscaria?
I'm not writing a book. There's some good books out there, but no, I'm just writing a Substack article because I'm concentrating on dosing, who consumes it and why and how they do. That's the subject. But there's so I don't spend any time on all of the sort of speculative uh, the speculative nonfiction about Amanita muscaria.
Mhm.
Um, you know, were the berserkers taking it? I don't know. I mean, it's
Yeah,
all like, it's a lot of fun to read. It's all very Da Vinci Code to me, but
yeah,
it's not my area to go into. So when sometimes not so long ago, I was doing a talk and a fellow wanted me to talk. He had questions or really just wanted elaborations on the Amanita muscaria as a proxy for Santa Claus story. And I said, it's a cool story, but
hmm,
make up whatever you want. It's as legit as anything else. And I know that's disappointing and um, but that's, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of a fact-based person, so
hmm,
I don't really indulge in that very much. Um, but there's very little that's known about the mushroom in terms of actual use. And I see my friend Jean has asked, what about a tea? How do what's the recipe? So
yeah,
I'm gonna print. I mean, I'm almost done with this essay, but I'm going to show you three different recipes.
great.
And none of the and I'm going to point out that there's no guarantee that any of them will do anything like they suggest. The only thing
Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
like, I mean, on the other hand, so the good thing is that the Amanita muscaria, you kind of have to take and consume quite a bit of the active ingredients in order to go in the wrong direction, to get into trouble or have a really big trip or, lose your black out. It's very common for people to do
Wow.
things like wake up the next morning and look at their phone and realize they talked to their mother for 45 minutes. And
Oh boy.
yeah,
Without
so
knowing. Yeah.
yeah, and don't remember a thing about it. So, but by and large, from what I can tell, is most people are interested in using it for, as a sleep aid, or as a kind of mild intoxicant. But you can go over the deep end too, and have other kinds of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the marketing is being done around like it's a psychedelic, it's a legal psychedelic. They're kind of comparing it to psilocybin mushrooms, and
Yeah,
it's really
totally.
just not so. It's
It's
very
totally, totally.
dissociative.
Yeah. It's more like being inebriated, you
Yeah.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they say. When I've taken it one time, I've only besides culinary uses, which I've done
Hmm.
many times, and I explain how to prepare them for culinary purposes. And really, why would you really bother with eating them? They're not that great. The real reason why is because mycologists, like people, like our friends at the Telluride Mushroom
Mhm.
Festival, everybody's like, "Oh, we're eating Amanita muscaria."
Yeah,
It's
right,
oh,
exactly.
sort of tough, right? And it's cool, it's fun, but they're not
Hmm.
that great.
No.
Anyway, so I put I explain how to do that. That's the main way I've taken it, and it's knocked me out, put me to sleep, like coma-like sleep. And then I also took more. I took like 100 times. Well, I was supposed to take 50 milligrams of pure muscimol as a sort of starter dose to see what it would do. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I took 500 milligrams
Oh,
instead.
wow.
Yeah. And it was, like I felt very buzzy, and then I would pass out, and then I would wake up. I'd be really, and then I'd pass out, and I'd wake up, so
Mhm.
it's mainly exhausting.
Yeah, I remember Gary Linkoff used to talk about at one point when he was in Eastern Europe, and he ended up taking it. And at one point, he stood up at somebody's table, and I mean, he's having a nice dinner with this, handmade hut with the handmade chairs, and this family is nice enough to take him in, and he stands up, and the chair flies across the room and smashes into a million pieces, and then I don't
Yeah.
know, he was like on an airplane or something, and he like pulled the seat belt like out of the seat, like
Yeah.
he just didn't know his own strength kind of
Yeah.
thing. But
It could also cause that Alice in Wonderland effect,
yeah,
where big things seem small and small things seem really big. So it's like getting up, stepping on a curve can really take a long time.
yeah,
Like, ah,
yeah.
So it's silly and warpy and stuff, I guess, but
Mhm.
it's definitely not at all like a psilocybin thing.
No,
On the other hand, other people um, have found that it helps them with their ADD. That's maybe the ibotenic acid in it. It's got
mm,
a Adderall-like effect.
mm,
There's a wide variety of kind of uses that people have
yeah,
for, but if you look at a book like, where's Baba Mash's book? I think I have it up here somewhere. Like microdosing Amanita
mhm.
muscaria.
Yeah, I have that
In
too.
it, people say it cures everything it from
Right,
reducing their tumors to like pimple cream. It's
right,
like all over the map, like gingivitis. It cures gingivitis
hmm,
and colon cancer. So
right.
yeah,
A lot of claims, but honestly, I haven't seen a lot of studies in it
yeah.
either.
No, there
And
aren't. There's very,
yeah,
very little out there. Yeah.
and I will say that, like, just anybody listening, if you see any at a bodega, don't don't bother. Like, really, do not bother. In fact, you might be barking up a tree you don't want to be barking up, because none of it's standardized, and it can be
No.
like
And
dangerous.
it could be like DMT in there, which is not necessarily a bad, toxic drug. It's just that in an unregulated environment, the chemists or the, manufacturers may not be removing all the solvents because
Right.
because if you have to do that, it really reduces, your product's volume. And so if they leave in those solvents, that might make you sick,
Yeah, or the way they process it, it can make you sick if you don't process it well. So, but getting back to the psychedelics and psilocybin and things like that, I am seeing things now. People that are seniors that have, not done psychedelics in the past, but are interested in kind of maybe they're very structured or rigid in what they're doing. What would you have different advice for them as far as that goes? And what
Hmm.
for somebody that's never done it before? I mean,
Well,
where do they start? Do they start with a study? Do they start by talking
well,
about?
all I can say is that one of the most famous sayings in the well, I guess in the drug world in general is that you can always take more, but you can never take less.
Yeah,
So
that's
if you're experimenting with this drug, I don't know, a lot of people prefer to titrate. So, you take your time. And that what they'll do is they'll increase their dose slowly over time to figure out what happens.
mm,
To understand their own body's response to this. And so if you're the kind of person that wants to dive in and not do a more kind of gradual and knowledge building type experience or experiences, then maybe the preferable situation is to take some of your Social Security money and go to a retreat. They're costly, but you can take a big trip under supervision.
yeah,
Is that supervision lame brain or genius? I don't know. There's
mhm,
various red flags and questions that one can ask a retreat organizer to get hopefully maybe a better idea of like what their safety protocols are and so on. I write all about that in the book.
yeah,
Um, the other option is, if you're trying to treat something like OCD or anorexia nervosa or PTSD or depression or any of these number of neurological ailments that are currently being tested. Most of them are being tested in academic settings, you know. So this is like a really big thing is that these studies that we're all so excited about have like 12 people in them. And yet we're extrapolating to the general population. Those 12
right,
people don't have comorbidities, which is one of the reasons why there's so few seniors in these studies. Because,
mm,
by the time you hit 65, 70, you start, shit starts happening. So whatever, you're on statins or so so these studies are small, they're with healthy and usually younger people. Um, it would be hard to get into a study if you're an older person unless it was targeting older people, which would be great
it would be.
because um because it's the correlative science indicates, that there's a lot of possibility there because there's the typical geriatric complaints like depression and grief and chronic pain and other stuff um has been shown to potentially be um, that has those complaints have been treated with psilocybin successfully in small studies in the past. So it stands to reason that studies on seniors who suffer from these things and psilocybin would be, very interesting. But the comorbidities complicates the whole show. Nonetheless, if you want to look into a clinical trial, it's easy as pie. You just go to clinicaltrials.gov and in the search engine you put psilocybin and then whatever the ailment is that you have a diagnosis for. You can't go in and say, well, I
Uh,
have OCD without a diagnosis because
okay, yeah, right,
you know. So if you have a diagnosis, then you could put that in there. And then, start the process of seeing if offer yourself to the recruiters. They usually don't pay, not in the academic setting. But, you know, that's
yeah,
another reason why most of the people that are in those studies have money and learned about them from wherever, Michael Pollan's book or something.
Right. Yeah. And I love how in depth you go about looking up the studies, but also even to go as far as talking to the people that have gone through it. Even if you end up placebo in some studies, they'll give it to you anyway afterwards.
Sometimes, yeah, that's
That's like,
becoming more and more of a practice.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I also describe like how to analyze, how to judge really, how to analyze a study, like how to
Mhm.
break it down. What are you looking for when you read a study so that
Mm.
it makes sense to you? I mean, I also, you know, I also describe, I can't remember if I do this much in the book, but it's in my talks since I've been talking a lot about how to um, how to spot and break down claims. Um,
Mhm.
how do you look at correlative science? How do you look at claims based on the correlative science? So, for example, a retreat might say, come to our retreat for $1,000 a day, and we will we'll give you psilocybin, which will cure your chronic Lyme. And where that claim comes from is there's a study that says the chronic Lyme is caused by neuroinflammation, or
Mhm.
neuroinflammation causes chronic Lyme. Then there's another study by other scientists from another facility, university, who wrote a study that said neuroinflammation in mice can be
Uh-huh.
brought down by psilocybin. Therefore,
Yeah.
psilocybin cures chronic Lyme. And that's what you have to do.
Yep.
No, you don't have to do it. I mean, that's one of the, but I mean, that's what I try to point out, that you can do that if you want to know the real truth.
Yeah.
You know,
It's very, we come across that in the medicinal mushroom sphere too,
oh
where
yeah.
people are
And
just making
supplements as
claims.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. People are looking for silver bullets, but when it comes down to it, and this comes down to your health, you really have to look, you have to flip over the box and look at the back of the ingredients. I mean, it's the same thing. You have to look at the claim, you have to go to the source and find
Yeah.
out what
And it's not that hard,
the sample size
if you've
was.
got
Yeah.
like the sort of roadmap to do it.
Right.
Anyway, as a journalist, I have to do it.
Right.
I can't repeat those claims or I'm going to look like an asshole. So,
Mhm.
I just check them all.
Yeah. So Joshua said, I recently met a scientist developing non-psychedelic drugs to create brain neuroplasticity based on the model of how psilocybin works for a startup called Delix Therapeutics. He was passionate about how empowering this might be for medical and psychiatric purposes. Have you learned about this kind of science?
Josh,
No.
I have not. Um, I'd be curious to um I'd be curious to find out how they're instigating neuroplasticity. Like in the drug world, they all drugs are neuroplastic. So
Hmm.
it's kind of tricky. It's like become a buzzword, but all drugs are neuroplastic, according to the scientists I've spoken with. There is a pharmaceutical company that's this, and I can't remember which one offhand, but they are pursuing a non-hallucinogenic psilocybin analog. So
Mhm.
because they're thinking, that the mental health benefits are not necessarily associated with the hallucinations. My feeling about that, or my sort of research, suggests that it's really not the drug, it's the experience that
Mm.
causes the effects that people later say help them quit smoking or whatever. Um, so it'll be interesting. There is like this very weird little paper that came out. I don't know if it's been refuted or what lately, because I've only seen the one, but it showed that psilocybin docks into serotonin receptors inside the cell, where serotonin itself doesn't seem to go. And the researchers or the writers of the paper had, and it's in my book, and you can find the notes and the connect,
Yeah.
you can look at the paper. But the researchers thought, well, what are those serotonin receptors meant to receive? inside the cell,
Mhm.
because they seem to be involved in neuroplasticity and actually, growing neurons. And more neurons is supposed to be is supposed to increase, is supposed to help alleviate depression, or depression is associated with less neurons.
Yeah, I thought
Um,
that was profound.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know where it's going to go, but when I read that, I was like, my mind went,
right.
it's
Yeah, and
like,
it's happening inside the cell. It's
yeah,
not even
and
just
there's
outside.
some
Yeah,
neurotransmitter. So maybe, maybe Josh, Delix Therapeutics has an idea of what kind of neurotransmitter is, what that do we naturally produce that is actually stimulating those interior receptors.
yeah,
Be
yeah, that
cool.
was so fascinating. Yeah. Um, yeah, another thing that I saw was, on that note, I know my friend Terry or Zeus Tapato, he's going for his doctorate in Maastricht University on psychedelic science, and he's actually been in Telluride this year for the Mushroom Festival, which is always the third weekend in August. But he'll be hopefully coming out this year to speak about his work. And he did some videos for an online platform called Healing Maps. And one of the things he would talk about is, just different forms of psychedelics and how they affect people. But one of the things he did mention is like the future of psychedelics having to do with, um, yeah, these different things that you can take that would target specific things in your brain. But I mean, this is like 50 years down the road. Who knows how long
Yeah.
it could, but it's pretty fascinating.
But really, the work that's being done on these on magic mushrooms and psilocybin are, they're kind of opening the door to thinking differently about,
Yeah.
mental health drugs, medications, and that's, that in itself is a fantastic contribution to, humanity and
Yeah,
medical science. So
absolutely.
yeah,
There is something to be said for taking the entire organism as a whole, though, rather than isolates, I will say. Because there's so many other things that we don't know that are in this compounds that interact with
totally,
our bodies that are
totally.
really pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
there's all these other analogs, and then there's all these ones that we don't know we
Right.
don't even know about. So the entourage effect also is one of the things that may differentiate one the experience people have on one species versus another.
Yeah.
So potency for sure, but body load, like, do you
Mhm.
feel boggy? Do you feel energized? Um, those
Yeah.
are, two, or at the speed of come on, like a species that is high in psilocin you'll come on faster to it,
Mhm.
than one that's low in psilocin, and so on.
Yeah.
So, and there could be any other things, it could, some things, who knows? I mean, it's it's still, it's one of those things that I put in my unknown category. So we don't, unknown in my mind means we don't know, but we may know someday.
Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
unknowable, which is
Yeah.
how any one of us in these boxes might respond to any
Mhm.
particular dose.
Yeah. And before I get to the next question, I will say I appreciated that in the book, how you kind of put out there, like, look, this is what we know now. You
Yeah.
know, things are moving so fast, and, we'll see where it goes. Jennifer asked, or she said, I found the anecdote about the nurse who had treatment resistant depression being reported to the police for growing her own. Incredibly shocking, very mean spirited act by someone. I can't help but wonder if people who do terrible, regretful things are more likely to have a bad trip. I also have a question about wood loving paralysis. Aren't
Ah,
the the knockers mostly propagating these types of mushrooms? How common is it? In fact, I had never heard of it either. I'd never
yeah,
heard of the paralysis from wood
yeah.
growing mushrooms.
It's really good to know about it. So there's a handful of wood lovers, um, of wood lovers that are associated with this effect. It's rare, but I have met, but some people have experienced it. And there
Mhm.
is some kind of survey-like work that's been done by some mycologists, this guy Kane Barlow in Australia. If you end up reading my book, you can go to the notes pages to find all that work. So what word lovers paralysis is, for those of you who haven't gotten to that section yet, it only happens with wood lovers, doesn't happen with cubensis, which is a coprophyte. The Is that the right pronunciation? Coprophyte? No, well,
Coprophytic. Yeah.
whatever.
Coprophyte. Yeah.
Okay,
Like
good.
poop.
Oh, so what happens is it can, you eat the mushroom, a person will eat the mushroom, and then either, at any point during a trip, they will experience paralysis, primarily the most typically of their arms and legs, or arms or legs, sometimes in very, very unusual cases of, like even their lungs, but more typically, and this is a rare effect, right? It's arms and legs. And so the reason why I think it's really important for that news to be out there is because if you're eating those wood lovers and then you go for a swim and the paralysis hits, that could cause some, you could drown. There is a fellow I read about who ate a wood lover, experienced the paralysis, and then fell over against a heater in his apartment. So he wasn't anywhere unsafe, except he fell against a heater and couldn't move for 5 hours. And so he experienced burns, terrible burns on the side of his body. So, it's like, I think that one of the reasons why the state of Oregon uses only Psilocybe cubensis in its protocols, its retreats and stuff, is because of wood lovers paralysis.
Right.
It's relatively rare, but super interesting and unknown exact. There's speculation about the chemicals that might be causing it. And knockers, yeah, are they proliferating it? I guess you could say that. One of the things they do is that's outside of just keeping, plenty of mushrooms growing. I don't know. Should I explain what knockers are? I guess so.
Yeah. It's worth it. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So
Gorilla
knockers,
inoculators.
short for inoculators. And this is a crew of people. They're in mainly the Pacific Northwest. And I met a crew in Seattle. And what they do is the psilocybe species, wood lovers, will grow on landscaping wood chips. Psilocybe in general, or the main ones anyway, like Liberty caps and wavy caps and cubes, as they say, they really have followed in our footsteps because as we started to increase land for livestock, more livestock poop, more habitat for cubensis, more meadow and grass, more habitat for azarescens, and then also our landscaping chips more as habitat for some of these other species, Stuntsii and so on. And the thing is that they're growing. We're increasing their habitats. So our behaviors are increasing their populations. So, but to keep them, those populations the psilocybes tend to be secondary decomposers, so they are breaking down stuff that's already kind of broken down. So they don't live for season after season after season, the way you might go back and find, a maitake for many years. 2 seasons maybe, and then they're done. They've wiped out, they've taken all the nutritions out of the substrate. So what the knockers do is they move the myceliated wood chips at the end of the season to new, or not necessarily the end, but they move the wood chips to new wood chip piles where the mycelium can grow and proliferate. And they do that. They bike they have their cars or whatever. They drive around looking for fresh wood chips laid by the city of Seattle. And in fact, they even have a mole. The folks I talked to, they have a mole in the landscaping company that lays the chips for the city of Seattle. And so they get a call like, okay, we're going to be putting chips all over, this library. And so all the guys and girls, they gather their myceliated stuff and off they go and put it into the new wood chip piles. So they're keeping, the population numbers up, but they are also doing a weird thing where they are preserving, phenotypes.
Mhm.
So they'll see like a strange morphology, or when they eat it, they'll say, okay, this one is very nice and energetic or has more of a body load. And so they will actually try to keep that phenotype going, which might otherwise just, last for, unless it had a real environmental benefit, would probably just go the way of, you know, the dodo. So they have a wonderful, I mean,
Yeah.
they do things like fill balloons with a slurry of spore and water and chuck the balloons over the fences into the landscape company's wood chips to try to inoculate the wood chips.
Yeah.
Inoculate.
Yeah. I
But
appreciate it.
are
Yeah.
they are they increasing populations of wood lovers? Yeah, I guess
Yeah, they
maybe.
are. Yeah. I like that at the end of that cultivating chapter, how, you talk about cultivating your own, and then you kind of put your little, you ended up becoming a knocker
I
in New
did.
York. You
Yeah,
became a knocker. There's some personal
yeah,
development there. That was,
yeah,
was
yeah,
really, really nice to see.
yeah. I went
Um,
the opposite direction.
yeah,
Instead of elemental cultivation thing, I was like,
yeah,
my
yeah.
my matrix is a mess. I'm
Nice.
dumping it in the riding trails.
Mhm. So do you know, like, I mean, any percentage of people, like what percentage of people have that kind of paralysis from those
No,
wet? It's
there's no
like
information
very, there's no
that
numbers on it.
survey. So,
Yeah,
the information that's out there is a survey, and it requested people who had experienced it to
right.
share their experiences. So
Yeah,
yeah, so no, there's
uh,
no, I mean, there's like, it's very hard to put numbers on any of this stuff because it's self-reported, and
right.
but bad trips, I think it's, I believe it's a worldwide drug survey found that bad trips were happened about 30% of the time.
Wow, that sounds high.
Yeah, and of those bad trips, I read a paper, but I had a hard time finding it again. Um, but I read a paper that suggested of that of those people who have bad trips, about 15%, so that's a small number, it can will experience or have experienced extended difficulties. So extended difficulties are a big deal. Every talk I give, somebody finds me either there or on the or through, email, whatever, afterwards to talk about derealization, primarily, sometimes sleeplessness or other extended difficulties.
Yeah, and it's a reality. And then sometimes people have profound effects even with bad trips. So
It's
one of the
mental. I
things,
mean, if a demon
yeah,
in your mind is saying to you, you are a bad person and you should kill yourself, I mean, that's
yeah,
horrible.
it's scary
So
stuff.
there's a lot of things that could go south.
Yeah. So David Wald, he kind of direct messaged me on this, but he said, "Can Gina tell us about the investigations underway separating the hallucinations from the therapeutic expectations?" I don't know.
David, I don't have any significant information on that except that they're going for it. And it's well known in the psychopharmaceutical world that this one company, which I can't remember the name, is going for it. But it's proprietary too. There's just so much info that goes out. Um, but it shouldn't be too hard to, get up to speed and track it down. But if you want to email me separately, we'll poke around and see if we can find it. I can ask Joyce too, how plausible she thinks it is in the first place. Joyce from who used to be at Compass.
Nice. Well, Brooke Reed, I just have to say, chimed in, and Brooke is the chief operating officer of NAMA. And he said, "What an exciting book club! I want to chime in and point in. He point up the NAMA's Medicinal Mushroom Committee's latest contribution to the Mycophile Quarterly, which he does an excellent job with, regarding the treatment to cluster headaches via psilocybe species. And that's something that yeah, that we published quite recently, that Avery Stempel published and put together. And the medicinal mushroom committee, with that David Wald is also a part of, we're looking at potentially coming out with a questionnaire survey where people can enter their experiences with medicinal and potentially psychedelic mushrooms. So look out for that in the coming summer. Um, so another question I got was by Susan, who said, animals must nibble these mushrooms. Do we know anything about the effects on them?
That's a provocative question because, well, first of all, don't give any magic mushrooms to your pets.
Really?
They can't give you consent. It's like it's
Yeah.
illegal and it's naughty to do it. Um, but there is, so it could very well be that it's like not good for animals' tummies. Bryn Dentinger, I guess, he's at the University of Utah, and one of the things he studies is like the role, why is psilocybin in mushrooms? And his his hypothesis is that psilocybin wreaks havoc on the guts of slugs, which evolved at the same time as the mushrooms, as various mushrooms evolved to produce psilocybin. And that may be why when we consume psilocybin, many of us get nauseous or have a hard time. So my guess is, in terms of animals, that if you've got any animal with a serotonin receptor, may very well have a bad response or get an upset tummy from the mushroom. There have been some studies. I haven't really paid attention to this, but I believe that there have been studies on animals like chimps and stuff and psilocybin. Um, but uh, you know, I'm not sure what the point was.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, but yes, it's not. Don't go around giving animals psilocybin. That's for sure.
Well, and
Um,
also the studies that are done like on mice, like, you know, is psilocybin an anti-anxiety drug? It's kind of like it's a little bit of a stretch to determine what
mhm,
a non-anxious mouse is. I mean, they're mice. They're always anxious. But beyond that, it's like head twitching, and there's various things they used to say, okay, this represents anxiety and but I mean, for lack of anything better, okay, but animal models have their limitations.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, so I have a question. Like, how did your opinion about psilocybin change as you were reading and researching for this book?
It's not like my opinion about it changed. It's more like my understanding of it got deeper and more
Hmm.
complete. And the degree of subjectivity involved in the experience, um, I guess before I wrote this book, I was not aware of how many different responses that the same dose could occasion.
Mm,
And um, I really had no idea about how important certain things were, how influential certain things were to a psychedelic trip. Like, I really had no sense before I wrote this book how important music is. That totally surprised me.
mm,
But it turns out that it's highly effective, and even as a tool in clinical trials, it can matter. For example, Peter Hendricks, I mean, I think he's a wonderful scientist. He's
yeah.
located at the University of Alabama, and he did this cocaine. He does a number of things, but addiction, um, but psilocybin and addiction studies is some of his main territory. And so he's doing a study on psilocybin and cocaine with cocaine addicts. And he had classical music on the headphones for the duration of their trip. And one guy was during that it's usually 2 trips in these clinical trials, sometimes 3. But this fellow during his first trip was really agitated. Did not work out for him at all. He didn't like his experience at all. And afterwards, because there's usually surveys and follow-up and interviews and stuff, Peter asked, so what, he asked various questions, and he found out the guy hates classical music.
Mm-hmm.
So they switched it up, and turns out the guy loves gospel. So they put gospel on his headphones for the next trip. He had a completely different response. His
Mm-hmm.
response was positive, proactive, and so on. So the importance of music, not only, to sort of direct a trip, but also to open the doors to a more positive experience, are, I had vastly underestimated. There was a experience I had with a Mazatec curandera who came to the United States to conduct a rather large group trip. There was like 12 people or 15 people there, maybe even more. There's also like huge group trips that go on here in New York City with 50 people in these big rooms. Can you
Wow.
imagine? Yikes.
No.
And they're not only just tripping on psilocybin, they're hippie flipping. They're going
Yeah.
psilocybin, MDA, psilocybin, MDA. It's like a long night. Anyway, so when I was with this curandera for 6 hours, or what seemed to me like the entire time, she was singing songs and hymns and stuff and chanting, and all in Mazatec or Spanish. She didn't speak any English. She was tiny, tiny little elegant woman. And at one point, well, more than one point, this fellow, he had a lot of anguish, and he was across the room from me. It's dark in a Mazatec ceremony. It's you trip in the dark. There's just some candles and stuff. And he was moaning and really just so anguished and having such a hard time. And everybody in the room started to get more and more distressed. You could feel the temperature rising in the room. It was like babies in the plane. One baby starts crying and then all the babies start crying. It was the
Yeah.
exact same thing. Um, but then the curandera, what she did is she kind of changed she'd before been very kind of solemn in her prayers, these murmuring. But then when this guy started to freak out, she changed her song and it became really lilting and summery and silly. And some people kind of giggled a little bit, and it brought down the temperature of the room, even to the point where the anguish guy kind of settled down for a while. And I thought, wow, what a pro. She was able to herd us away from trouble with music or with chanting and song.
Mm-hmm.
Its
I love it.
importance of music really made a big impression on me.
Yeah, I loved that. I loved hearing about that story. That was really profound too. And I liked that idea of herding too, more than, leading.
Yeah.
It's like, very Western science. It's like we're going to lead you through this trip, and it's like, no, you're going to do your own work. We're just going to hurt. We're just going to make sure the boundaries are there so you don't like fall outside of them and have a bad trip. But yeah, I remember you're like going further into that in the chapter of spiritual trips. I really appreciate it. One thing that really stuck with me, and then I think it's profound with psilocybin, but it's kind of profound outside of that, and it's that Mazatec woman that was saying that we are interconnected with everything else. When you lose sight of that, illness can manifest.
Oh,
In
yeah.
fact, it was like
Yeah,
one of the
that's the
main,
Mazatec's. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's like it was almost the cause of so many illnesses can be, the fact that we lose sight of our interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's
Will
like
become.
their cosmology, I mean, it's a cosmology. There's a lot of aspects to it, and I don't go into a depth, and I found myself a
Mhm.
little bit out of my league because understanding that material. But in essence, they say you are only as healthy as your community and your environment. And I
Right.
thought that was really a lesson. It makes me wonder if medicalizing the mushroom is, maybe we're going, this efficacy thing is maybe we're going in the wrong direction, and
Mhm.
actually the right or an alternative that might work, or something else to think about, would be this idea of community centers that are staffed by people in the community, that serve people in the community, and are not so much about targeting an illness as in responding to what's happening in a group. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Certainly, you could
Connecting.
ask the Mazatec how to do that. I mean, they know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it should be paid for it too, in my opinion.
Yeah, really. And I mean, that's so much with like connecting people with nature, connecting people with each other, and bringing people together to kind of share stories and experiences. And this is where such a profound experience is, it's such a beautiful thing to share.
And it also can, let's be honest, John, most people, the majority of trips are taken to have fun. They're not
Mm,
they're not taken to see God or to solve a mental problem, or they're mostly most of the time people are doing them to, for giggles.
yeah.
Sometimes it's fantastic, they have an epiphany or they're able to
Hmm.
solve a problem. But
But
that's, a lot of how we use them in the West.
yeah. But it's memorable moments that you'll remember forever with your
Yeah, super
friends
fun.
and with like, the people and the things that you experience. It's just
Yeah.
it's so rich. It's so enlivened.
Yeah. I mean, super fun unless, you take too big a
Mhm.
dose, and the only way to get
Yeah.
out of the woods is with a helicopter.
Oh yeah, let's hope not. Um, well, this is just, I mean, I had so much fun reading this book and going through every bit of it. And I really appreciated having this conversation too. If anybody else wants to chime in with questions, feel free. If there's something that you would want to share with people or want to know from people that have read the book, feel free to ask us questions as well, or um, if there's other things that you see on the horizon, I would love to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'm curious to know, like, how you came to the book, and also, um, uh, you know, how do you think the word could be spread? Because I think that, unfortunately, I'm experiencing some censorship, and and even though, I write for these newspapers, I'm a known quantity, there has been nothing on this book in the mainstream media. It's like, I mean, I'm surprised, frankly. And at first I was like, oh, it must be because the book sucks. But the reviews from places like Publishers Weekly and so on have been great. So, and that's why it's in all these bookstores. I get pictures from all these little towns, or with "Have a good trip" in the book, in the window. But it's really kind of a curious phenomena. Maybe it's like the sort of mainstream media, and I say that as being a member of it, is kind of pulling back and saying, well, we hyped it really hard, and now all these people are interested in doing it. Let's not um let's not hype it anymore. I mean, I kind of feel
Yeah.
like maybe that's what's going on, but I don't know. Anyway, I'd be interested in trying to figure that out. Um,
Yeah, I wonder how we could support you in that. Maybe we can all write columns to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and say, "Hey, we read this book, and it's amazing, and you should review it."
I mean,
Um,
it like could help people. That's
couldn't
the whole
hurt.
point.
Right.
I see
Exactly.
Jan's talk. Have you experienced Jan's comment here? Have you experienced any negative backlash from people for having written this? Jan, no, not from people who've read it. They're all like, "Oh, I'm really happy to know about Word Lovers," but
Great.
from, I think, the backlash. I have experienced negative backlash in the by the very fact that the book is kind of being ignored. And I really thought, and my publishers did too, because they wanted to do this book. I really thought, we all thought that the country was ready, that we recognize people are interested in these drugs and using this drug, and they want to know the facts. They want to know,
Mhm.
they want to know what's going on. And and I guess we're wrong. I don't know if the
Mm.
audience is, but the messengers of that about this book and what it is and what it isn't, are just, mute. So it's been a very, it's really a problematic thing. As an author, it always is a drag when your book doesn't get out there. And sometimes that happens. But on the other hand, I feel like it's just sort of not providing important information. I don't know. It's just
I don't
weird.
think so. I think the information is all there. It's really important and
No,
very
but
substantial.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then
no,
it's
the
just
book
about
has
like,
got it.
but
But
the people don't want to put
why
it.
yeah. Do they think it's not what it is? I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of, freaking me out because, the success of a book, um, what it really is from a writer's perspective is that if the book does all right, then they let you do another book. I have
Hmm.
another book I want to do.
You do?
So,
Well, that was actually one of the questions we got in is what will your next book be about?
my next book, if if I sell enough of this one, they'll let me write it. But I can't really say, but I'll just, say I'm going back into the microbial life, bacteria primarily. Um, but I'm also doing some stuff with spirituality and myths.
Whoa.
So I'm going to leave it at that. Anyway,
Wow.
it's rowdy. It's a good subject. But you know, you're only as worth as much as your last book. It's a tough industry.
Well, that sounds fascinating. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Um,
You know what? I'm going to explore various chapter ideas and stuff on my Substack. So if anybody who
Great.
feels like signing up, we can see how things land if people like it. And
Absolutely. Yeah, we posted the Substack on the group meeting chat. So if you scroll up to the top, it'll be there. If somebody asks, will there be a YouTube or other link for this meeting? Absolutely. We are recording it and it will be on the NAMA website, I believe. Otherwise, it'll go out in the NAMA newsletter. Signing up for NAMA is a really great idea. If you're not a NAMA member already, I mean, we have book clubs like at least 6 a year. We have all sorts of different speakers that you get notified. I mean, at least 2 or 3 a month. And these are
I'm going to
people.
Michael Bugh.
Oh yeah, Michael. Yeah, he's been doing some amazing talks, and so it's really pretty incredible. Michael Bugh taught Paul Stamets. I mean, you got to understand the level that you're dealing with here. It's kind of the nation's and the world's really best mycologists speaking on their subjects. So it's a great group to be a part of, and it's a great community to connect with. So I'm seeing another question on. Have you? Yeah, on. The next book we don't know about, but stay tuned. That'll be out soon. And um, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I think we should organize a campaign. I think if everybody here just writes a little bit of something to somebody, and also go on Amazon and review the book, and talk about it on all the different stream sites you can.
you know
Um,
what? If you all are game for it, just if you have like an auntie or a cousin who's like, I just bought these microdoses and just get them my book.
yeah, you
That's
know,
what that's my, goal is that people who really,
yeah.
need it, get it.
It's funny because I was going to say tonight that, I had a really hard time getting into the book because I'll tell you why. I bought one and I very quickly gave it away to a friend of mine that like studied psychedelics for a birthday. And I was like, oh, you need to read this book. And then I had to order and wait for another one from the bookstore. And then, I got that one and then I quickly gave that away. And then it was Christmas time. So I gave a few away. So by the time I got to it, took me a while to get into it.
Well, thanks.
Um, yeah, but yeah, I really appreciate everything that you've written here. What you've compiled here, I think, is so timely, so perfect for what people need right now. And I think it's a great follow-up, and it's a perfect one of our time. And I really appreciate you spending the evening with us and talking about your book. Do you have any upcoming events and places we can come see you again, or things you're doing?
Uh, I've got stuff. I'm going to be in DC in February. I'm going
Right
to
on.
do I'm teaching a class at the New York Botanical Gardens on psychedelic mushrooms, also in February. I'm doing a myco consortium talk. What the fuck is that? I don't know, but I'm doing that in February too. Actually, that's Tom Bigelow. I do know what it is.
Oh
He's
yeah.
I'm just teasing.
Yeah.
And so, that looks like about it for the next couple of weeks. And then come and I if I were a more together person, I would be putting this on my website. I have eugeniabone.com. But I always
Yeah.
put it on after the fact, but I'm
Mhm.
going to try to get better now that I'm kind of off book tour, which is a little bit of a grueling thing where you fly, you do a talk, you sign a zillion books, and then you fly out, and then you fly, sometimes to the same area multiple times. So I'm
Mhm.
a little bit like my GI is all screwed up from that. So now that I'm back and done, I'm gonna be better about staying on top of my own PR.
Nice. Yeah. Well, Ken Bugleson, who is the 4A chair for NAMA, is asking if you are going to be at the next NAMA 4A in Vermont in September. I think that sounds like an invitation.
Well, give me a call, Ken. I'll certainly, be there. I
Great.
would certainly be there. It's not at the same time as Burning Man, is it?
No, it's not. It's a little bit later.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I know. Yeah, that's always there's sometimes crossover there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you there. And I posted again your Substack. I'm really looking forward to looking into that. And
Yeah.
well,
You can
I'm
see the
sure.
name. The name is because I write about food, I've written many cookbooks, and it's called Food, Mushrooms, Microbes, Drugs. I know.
Really,
I
yeah,
haven't been censored by Substack yet.
nice.
Let's see
That's
what happens.
perfect. Yeah. Excellent. Well, give Kevin my best, and I look forward to seeing you next time I'm in the city. And thank you again for being here.
John, thanks for inviting me. Thanks everybody for tuning
Yeah,
in and reading the book or being interested. And we're all mycophiles together. It's great to see the family.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for
Good
being
night.
here.